Jai beloved Baba to you all. First and foremost, I offer my deepest gratitude to our beloved Lord, Avatar Meher Baba, for it is because of him that we're all here together in his home in the West. And today is a very special date for me and for all of you, because it marks the anniversary of Eruch Jessawala's end to his lingering, and the fulfillment of Baba's promise to him made so many years ago, that a day will come when I will give you my hand and pull you out of the filth of illusion. So August 31st, 2001, at 2:31 a.m. in the wee hours of the morning, Eruch made his last Baba, Baba, bowed his head, and it was the end of his lingering. But for me, it's hard to believe that 23 years have passed since that date. That will never return, of course, in this lifetime for any of us. And all that's really left are our memories. So because of that, in trying to think of, please, Baba, help me, what am I going to tell these people, for God's sake? A memory came to my mind. And it was something Eruch had said to me long before he passed away. But the irony is the great impact and truth it has had on my life, but also is true for all of your lives. And before I tell you what was said, I just want to make it clear to you all. I am sitting up here. Baba has blessed me undoubtedly to be living a life in his home at Meherazad, to have lived with his Mandali for so many years. And that's his grace. But it's also his grace for each of you, wherever he has put you. Because Eruch had said that Baba had told the Mandali that creation has been created with such precision, such exactitude, that it is to help each individual soul in their swiftest journey to him. So then Eruch would say, so you see, in essence, when we ask him, in a sense, to change what is happening to us, or please, Baba, can't it be this instead of that? Eruch would say, in a sense, in our limited mind and unknowingness and ignorance, we're belittling the perfection with which our lives have been created. And then he would say, and I'm sure many of you who were with Eruch through the years at Meherazad would hear him say this, but see how compassionate he is. And then he'd sigh, he'd say, but after telling us that, what does Baba say to his lovers? He tells us, but if you feel a need to ask, ask, ask. Ask if you feel a need to ask, because who is there to ask but me? But never expect an answer, because the answer is already with you. So it's a great grace and blessing on all of us to be here, and we really can't realize the great fortune that this small group of people has in their destiny. To be at his home in the West, to be wherever he's put you. Why? Because he lives within you. Okay, so having said that, there is always a caveat to speaking. At least for me, I feel this way. Because, when you work with someone for so many years, naturally, some liberties that someone can take who doesn't know the person so well, someone who knows the likes and dislikes of the person, has to take that into consideration. So the caveat with Eruch was always, is always, and will ever be always, that the focus must and should always be on the beloved and not the slave. So I hope today there'll be some glimpses of what it was like to live with someone who lived with Meher Baba and my life there. And for those of you who haven't met Eruch, maybe you'll get some taste of what a unique personality he had. And for those of you who were blessed to meet Eruch, then I hope it will buoy up those memories in your heart so that they can overflow tonight on his day of reunion. I would like to begin tonight's talk with a story that is an incident in Eruch's life. Why? Because it had a great impact on Eruch and set in motion his understanding of what it means to live with the Avatar. That he is always there. And when we rely on him, then we can never be lost. So this takes place at the end of the new life. I hope everyone here is familiar with the new life or what it means, because in an hour, it would take me an hour to explain that, and that would be the end of it. But Baba said it was a life of hopelessness and helplessness with absolute reliance on God. And for those companions who traveled with Baba, where the sky was their roof and the ground was their bed, their mode of operation, their mode of transportation were merely their hands and feet to do his bidding. By the end of this new life journey, Eruch would say that he felt like an old, haggard horse who sees in the distance the stable gates, and he's just trying to, first a gallop, then a little trot, then a little walk, then just telling himself just a little bit further, a little bit more. You can do it. You can do it. You can make it to the stable, and then there'll be relaxation, and it'll all be over. So he made it to the stable. Those 4 last Mandali, who were the companions with Baba in the new life, that remained with him to the end, they made it to Meherazad, and Baba completed his mono-nash work, first starting it on Seclusion Hill and then ending it in the mono-nash cabin. And when that work was completed, because at that time, mind you, that was still the new life. So everyone else at Meherazad was separated. They didn't have any contact with the new life companions. It was still new life. Mono-nash means the mono-nash is the annihilation of the mind. And sometimes when you hear that, you might think annihilation of the mind. Eruch would say, don't think that it's the annihilation of Baba's mind. No, his is the universal mind. But what it means is that in this phase of his work, he was giving a push to those souls who were ready for that last step for annihilation of the mind, which has to come before you can reach the destination. So Baba completed his mono-nash work. He stepped out of the mono-nash cabin, and all the Mandali sighed with relief, particularly Eruch. Because now he thought it'll go back to normal. But a few days goes by, And then a week goes by. And suddenly Baba says, I want to call you all together. And Baba does. He brings them in together. And he says, now, I want you all to get ready. I am going to plan for, Am I supposed to go on fast? But you can fill it up if you want. Go ahead. Tangent spotter. Anyone a tangent spotter for me? Come on, help me out. What did I just say?
They had a big meeting.
That Baba called them all for a big meeting, and Baba said, now for the next phase of my work, I want you all to get ready because I am going on my trip to the West. And he turns to Eruch, who was there. Everyone knows that Baba was on silence, right? All of you know he was silent, but it was a dynamic silence, which meant that so many activities went on in that silence. And one of Eruch's duties was he was one of the main people who interpreted for Baba. Now, I want to make it clear, all the Mandali could read Baba's board and gestures, but it so happened that Eruch was the one who most often would read out the board and read his gestures and alphabet through all the interviews, through darshan programs, savasas, public programs. So Eruch is interpreting as Baba is saying this, but he's thinking to himself, my God, I thought we were going to go back to our old life. I'm totally exhausted. But he's having to say out what Baba is saying. And Baba turns to Eruch, and Baba says to Eruch, now I want you to go to Adi's office, and I want you to get the papers ready for my passport and your passport. And Eruch doesn't say anything, and Baba says, and do it quickly. In a few days, get everything ready. There's much work to be done. We're going to the West. And you can just imagine what it was like for Eruch, because for Eruch, he said that he felt as though he had tremors within. He would tremble so strongly within himself. Not that anyone could see it, but the feeling of that trembling, like, you know, we all have cars, and you know when the car stalls and then it kind of shakes like that? Well, that's how he felt inside. And he was so exhausted after the years of the new life that he thought, my God, what am I going to do? I can't go with Baba, because you see, his duty was not only as the interpreter, not only as his driver, not only as his valet, not only as whatever Baba wished, carrying out his behest, must, hunts, and assorted, but he also attended to him personally, attended to Baba's body. So he felt within himself, how can I go to the West and attend to Baba? I'm so exhausted. I don't have the energy to do it. I'm going to be a burden to him. Someone's going to end up having to take care of me. Baba's going to have to take care of me instead of me take care of Baba. I don't want to be a burden on him. I'll be just a drag on him. So all this, and I'm sure all of you know what it's like, this worry, 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 worry inside. So he's thinking these things, but he doesn't say a word to Baba. 3 days goes by, maybe 4 days, and Baba again calls the men together, and he brings up this same topic. And he says, Eruch, have you gotten the passports? Have you gotten my passport ready? Have you gotten your passport ready? And Eruch folds his hands before Baba, and he says, Baba, please, I am so exhausted. I am trembling inside. I can't go with you to the West. Please forgive me, Baba. Please release me from this. I can't do it. I'll be a drag on you. I'll be a burden to you in your travels. Please, Baba, I can't go. Now, we all think of the God-man as we all know he is, because the attributes of God, it's infinite compassion, infinite love, right? Infinite omniscience, omnipresence, all knowledge, all knowing, all seeing. So naturally, on that level, of course, God knows everything. But at the same time, all the Mandali would say this, that to live with the household Baba, to live with that perfect man amongst men, means something else entirely. Because what is perfection? Perfection means it can't exclude anything, right? So you can't have only half of perfection. Perfection is perfection. So Baba, in perfect ignorance, says to him, what do you mean you can't come with me? He says, Baba, please, I'll be a drag on you. I won't be able to take care of you. I won't be able to perform my duties. And Baba says to him, that's ridiculous, what you're saying. Nothing more is said. Get everything done. And now a couple more days go by, and again, Baba brings it up. Now, mind you, I should mention for those who aren't aware of this, you know, when Baba was in silence, so Eruch would have to, of course, read the board out. But when it was something about himself, he would also have to say that out too. So if Baba said to him, are you mad? Eruch would have to say, are you mad, to himself, you see? Yeah. And anytime he would interpret for Baba, he said it wasn't just a question of reading the alphabet, when later Baba used the alphabet, and it wasn't just a question of reading the letters on the board. And Baba was very fast, and if you really want to get a picture of it, Baba, let's pretend, is where Dennis is sitting in the back, and Eruch is here, let's say in Mandali Hall, and all the crowd are turned, of course, to Baba. And then Eruch would have to read what Baba was saying on the board. Now just think about that for a moment. I'm myopic, I don't have great eyesight, but even if you had great eyesight, you're having to read it upside down, really. You know, because Baba's doing this, in a sense, it's almost like the opposite to what it is, because he's not doing it this way for Eruch, you see? So Eruch is reading all of it out, and again Baba says, I'm telling you, get ready to go. You're to go with me to the west. Eruch again says, Baba, you don't, please Baba, you must forgive me, Baba, please. I can't go. I can't go. I will be a drag on you. I will be a burden to you. I'm totally exhausted, Baba. I can't stand up. I'm barely standing on my 2 feet. And then Baba, and the reason I brought up about being perfection and compassionate is that sometimes you'll see how it may not appear to be compassionate, what is happening in the instant. But on reflection, you see the great compassion that was underneath it. So he says to Eruch, what is the use of your living with me? If you won't obey what I say, then get out from here. Yeah, Baba was fiery. And this wasn't even the Munzi Lamim days. So Eruch stands up and he turns to Baba, because naturally you have to obey what the Lord says. And he says, Baba, I would rather leave you than be a burden to you. And then Baba said, then get out. All right. So now Eruch leaves Baba's presence. Where does he go? This is at Meherazad. He goes to the Monornash cabin, because after Baba finished his Monornash work, Baba had given that cabin to be Eruch's cabin. So Eruch goes in the cabin. Of course, if any of you have seen the Monash cabin, Eruch used to laugh and say, all this paraphernalia that's in here now, believe me, none of it was here in Baba's time. You know, no cupboards, no this, no that. It was very, very simple and plain. But he goes in and he sits down on the one lone seat there, and he looks around and he goes, well, I mean, he's talking to himself, his thoughts, but in sharing the stories with us, I'm like a parrot. I'm trying to share with you how Eruch would tell it. Eruch says, well, Baba says to leave, I better leave. But then I better not take anything that Baba has given me. So maybe I should take off this shirt. Baba gave me this shirt. So he thinks I'll take off my t-shirt. But then he thinks, yeah, but the trousers I'm wearing, he gave me that too. What am I going to do? Take off the trousers. Well, my chappals, my shoes, those too are from Baba. And he's sitting there thinking about it. He goes, never mind, I'll just wrap myself in a blanket. But then he says to himself, Eruch, that blanket too Baba gave you. So he's contemplating it, and he thinks to himself, never mind, I'll just go out naked. See how our mind is? And what to me is one of the most, for me, and I'm sharing it with you, maybe you all feel this way too. For me, one of the most touching things about the Advent is that these souls, who in essence are the greatest souls in the universe because they've been destined to serve the avatar, in the story of the Advent, in every Advent, granted the story is different because it's always according to the consciousness of humanity at the time. So the story in Ram's time would be different. The story in Jesus' time was different. The story in Muhammad's time was different. Krishna's different. And now this Advent has its own story, which is unfolding. But what has struck me in reading about them all is that the thread that goes through them all is that even those souls who were so blessed to live their life by the side of the avatar, he makes them live that life and feel that life and go through that same oven of effacement that we all have to go through if we want to become his. So in a sense, by making them have their own life stories as human beings, as individuals, even though it was already destined before they were born that Eruch would be with Baba, Bao would be Baba with Baba, Mani, Mara, of course, the purest soul in the universe would play the role of Radha or Sita this time. Even though that's all been destined, nevertheless, each one of them in their life has to go through essentially what we all will have to go through in our life. And that is the letting go, giving up, giving in, accepting thy way, not my way. What you want, Baba, not what I want. And they each have to go through that. So in a way, that becomes living inspiration, or at least that's how I take it. I find that very touching because it doesn't have to be that way. You know, if they're perfect souls destined for this role, they can just be popped into it. But no, it's so that we can learn that to become one with him and to lead that life of surrenderance is no small thing. As a matter of fact, this is a little tangent, but you know, I'm 77 years old now. So my memory is not really as good as what it used to be. So I want to share this with you because it's come in my mind. So just remind me, Keith, of what I was talking about before, if I forget. And that is, I'm moving ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you. See, this gives me a chance to drink some water in case I forget again what I'm going to say. So, pardon me?
Did someone ask something? What?
So I'm reading out a letter that came to Eruch. That's why I called it a tangent. I'm jumping ahead. But I'm reading a letter out to Eruch, which was part of my duties with him. And there was a rule in working with Eruch. And Eruch told me this when I first started working with him. And he said, Baba had told him that, he said, whatever you hear from other Mandali or letters, whatever it is, let it go in one ear and out the other. And so when I started working with Eruch, he said, if you're going to work with me, then you have to remember that. That is what Baba told me, and that is what I expect from you. That whatever we read, it goes in one ear and out the other. Because of course, people write personal things. They're not writing to me, they're writing to Eruch in that circumstance. Or when Eruch was reading out the letters for Baba and replying, it was the same situation. So we have read this letter. I've read it out to Eruch, and I've got my little pad to take the dictation. And Eruch just chuckles. And he says to me, you know, one day I was reading out a letter similar to this to Baba. And in that letter, the man says to Baba, Baba, you know, he's telling him how much he loves him and all this is there. And then he says, Baba, please give me permission to surrender to you. Yeah. Who is that there? So Baba chuckled himself, you know, silently. Eruch said he remembers him sitting there chuckling. And he says, what sort of a question is this? Now, Eruch is, of course, interpreting what Baba is saying. And if you can imagine, he's telling me the story of what happened when he was with Baba. Baba says, what sort of a question is this? Is he mad? Is he crazy? You don't ask permission to surrender. Surrender means surrender, and surrender means you've burnt all your bridges. There's no going back. And then Eruch sighed and he said to me, he said, but for people like us. I mean, you know, he uses the people like us. I'm thinking, yeah, people like me maybe, I don't know, you know, but people like us. But it's true, really. People like us, he said, for us, we have to surrender moment by moment, every moment of our lives, if we wish to be surrendered to him. And when you surrender, in real surrender, you have to surrender and then forget that you've surrendered, because now it's no longer in your hands. Your life is not your own. Okay, now I do remember. So we're now back in the cabin, in the Monash cabin, and Eruch has just said, how am I going to go? Everything's been given to me by Baba. So then he thinks to himself, I know, I'll wait till it's nightfall, and when it's night, then I'll go out naked. Because I can't go out naked in the day because people know me. I'm associated with Baba. If somebody sees me walking down the road naked, it's not going to reflect well on Baba. You know, one of his Mandali naked. So no, I better go under the cover of night. So now he thinks he's figured it out. He'll go. But the mind, then the mind says to him, but you've surrendered your life to Baba. You've given up your freedom to become his slave. So who's going to go? And he thinks about that. And then the mind says to him, how can you go? Now you're not your own. And when that thought took over his consciousness, a knock came at the door of the Monash cabin, and one of the Mandali said, Baba wants you to eat well and sleep well and your fate will be decided in the morning. Now, when Eruch would tell the story in Mandali Hall, he'd always say, food and sleep are my fast friends. Of course, eat well, sleep well means their plain meal, rice and dal, or sometimes on occasion, dal and rice, and chapati and vegetables on it. It's not, So Eruch goes to sleep. And early hours of the morning, there's another knock on the door, and a hand from one of the Mandalis gives him a sheet and says, Baba told us to tell you to read it and do it. So he reads it. And it was a long, foolscap sheet, and it had the instructions that Baba had set out for Eruch to complete while Baba was in the West. The day that Baba left for the West, Eruch, accompanied by Pendu, was to go out all over India, and, well, of course, united in Pakistan and India, so it's India and Pakistan, giving out his message of love and truth. And I've seen the document. Naturally, I can't recite everything from it. But, India in those days was very primitive. It isn't even like the India that many of you have visited at this time, or even the India that I visited when I first came to India in 71. It was very primitive in those days. So the idea of going out on a 7-month tour all over India was no small thing. Part of the requirements were that they couldn't accept money from anyone. They could accept, if a Baba lover wanted to give them bus fare to get somewhere, that could be accepted. Whatever food was given to them was to be accepted in that way. But essentially, it was a very rigorous tour. So Eruch reads this and he thinks to himself, my God, it would have been way easier to have gone with Baba to the West than it is to do this. What is this, a vengeance on me? And it was very, very difficult. But of course, you obey the Lord. So now the men would meet with Baba, of course. So Baba, when it's time for the men to come together, Eruch also comes. And Baba turns to Eruch and he says, so have you read it? And Eruch says, yes, Baba. He says, good, do it. There's nothing more to say on that. A few more days goes by. And Baba, in his perfect ignorance, says the God-man, turns to Eruch and he says, why do you have such a long face? You look so solemn. What's wrong with you? And Eruch says, Baba, here you're sending me out as a public speaker? I've spent years at your feet, but as your valet, as your interpreter, as your driver, I'll sweep your floors, I'll do all those things and attend to you, but I'm not a speaker. I don't know what to do. What do I know of your message of love and truth? Baba looks at him and he says, where have you been all these years? Don't you have eyes? Don't you have ears? What have you been doing all these years? But I don't know what to say, Baba. This isn't my line. But Baba is our compassionate Lord after all. So he says, all right. He says, all you have to do is this. Before you get up to speak, just say, Baba, you want me to speak, then you speak. And Eruch would reflect on that period of his life when he and Pendu went out. And he said it had a great impact on him because he came to realize that he had pride, he had egotism. And it was that made him feel that he would be a burden on Baba, that he would be a drag on Baba. You know, ego and pride are so ingrained in us and so difficult to get out. One can think on the surface, no, he feels he's thinking of Baba, right? I mean, he's caring about Baba. Baba, I won't be able to take care of you. I'm shaking, I'm trembling, I'm exhausted. I'm going to be a burden to you if I just fall over and collapse in a faint. All that's there, right? Or am I the only one who thinks that? Don't any of you agree? But underneath that is the lack of trust then in his Lord and Master, Avatar Meher Baba. You see the difference? It's the pride that made him assert, I will be a burden on you. I will be a drag on you. How can I do this? While as what we have to become is so humble in our own, how shall I say, awareness of giving up everything to him, that it's in his hands, it's not in our hands. If Baba says for me to do something, it's not for me to say, hey Baba, I don't know how to do that. No, you find a way to do it, because if he wishes you to do it, you will be able to do it. If he wishes you to do it, he will make you do it. See, I'm sitting up here. An example of that. If he wants you to live with him, he will make it possible for you to live with him. But if he doesn't, no matter how much you long for it or try for it or do this or do that, unless and until he wishes it, it will be impossible. And every one of the Mandali would agree with this and say this in their own way. You know, the Mandali were very diverse individuals. They each had their own unique personalities, and each personality was very different. And even if you asked them about something, what did Baba mean by this? If you asked Eruch, you might get one answer. If you asked Bauji, you might get another. If you asked Katie, if you asked Money, if you asked, you know, each one of them had their viewpoint on Baba. But what was singular about all of them, without any differentiation, was that he was the pole star of their life. And everything about them, everything they did, everything they carried out was to carry out his behests and for his pleasure. So this incident for Eruch, he said, was like a shining sun on the horizon of his life, because he realized that it was Baba who got it done, not him. It was Baba who got it done, unseen, of course, but giving him the energy to go through it. And just as a little amusement, he used to share with us. Sometimes he'd share one aspect of it, sometimes he'd share another, depending on, you know, his mood or whatever it was. But one of the interesting things he would say is, you know, they were going day and night and day, all over to all these Baba centers and villages and places that had been chalked out for them to go. And when they would go, often there would be a host who would host them, and there'd be a group of people who, just like we're all here tonight, would be listening to them, and Eruch would have to speak, and Pendu would take care of all the arrangements. So at the end of the program, naturally, before they took the bus to the next village early in the morning, they wanted some sleep. But sometimes these programs would go on hour after hour after hour. So in one of these locations, the Baba lover who was hosting them finally tells everybody, all right, it's midnight. We should let them have some sleep. They have to catch a 5 a.m. bus. Please everyone disperse. And then he takes them to his home. So he takes them there, and it was very late and everything. And he comes to the little hall, and Eruch sees that there's the bedding rolls that are laid out for them to sleep, because that was the usual thing, they would sleep on bedding rolls. So Eruch looks, and then he looks back at the host, and he says, there's just me and Pendu. It's only the two of us. And the host says, yes, that's right. And he goes, but there's 3 bedding rolls there. Why are there 3 bedding rolls there? And the host says, well, I'm your host, and I want to be there in case you need something. So I'm just going to sleep beside you. In case you need anything, I'll be there to get it for you. But you just sleep. Don't worry about anything. So they were dead tired. It was one of those things where you just are out in a moment. But as they lie out on their bedding roll, and Eruch said he's just about to close his eyes, the host, who's lying next to Eruch, puts his head in his hand like this, laying out on his bedding roll. And he says, Eruch? And Eruch goes, yes. Goes, Eruch, remember when you were talking about such and such that Baba said? You never really explained fully what Baba meant by this. Can you tell me what he meant? And there it was, all night long, having to talk more and more and still yet more. And he even would say how Pendu would pull on his pajama pants because Pendu was there, and he'd say, Eruch, for God's sakes, tell him to stop so we can get some sleep. But Eruch would shrug his shoulders and say, what could I do? I couldn't spare myself because this was what Baba had given me. This was his order to me. So they would spend all night sharing stories and then be up, wash their faces, and catch an ST bus, which in those days, if any of you, is there anyone here who remembers the old ST buses, what they were like? So yeah, can you imagine what they were like then? The roads weren't even as good as they were in the early 70s. So then they would go to the next place, and the next place, and the next place, and the next place, on and on and on and on. Eruch said when they went to the south, sometimes he'd get up to speak, and he'd finish talking, and a few minutes later they'd hand him a folder in Telugu or whatever was the language, and it would be like a full pamphlet, this big. And Eruch would say, what does it say? I only spoke for, an hour, and you've got this huge booklet out of it. Then he said to this day, he doesn't know what was written about what was said. But it was a lesson for him because he realized that Baba wanted him to do it. And if he trusted in Baba and Baba wanted it to be done, he would see him through it. And the other thing I want to share is that to the day Eruch passed away and died, in every circumstance, before he went into Mandali Hall, before he had any interviews, before he spoke to any of us, every day he would close that door to this Monash cabin, and he would speak to Baba and say, Baba, you want me to speak? You speak. So that's why all of us who heard Eruch share these stories, they've had an impact in our life because what he shared is what Baba wanted him to share, to help us all. And as Eruch said the other day, and I guess it was yesterday in that interview that Gary did, these stories are for all of us. Because whether they happened 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, a millennium ago, truth is truth. And that is the life of spirituality. It's a life of contradictions. The limited mind can never understand it. It can only be understood by accepting the vagaries of love and the obedience to the Master. Now you might be wondering, what does that have to do with you up here? Because I'm going to say right off, I never met Meher Baba. So of course I don't have Baba's personal assurance that he gave Eruch. But nevertheless, I implore him that may it be so that whatever is shared tonight will in some way maybe open a window for one of you or a few of you, or some new facet that you had not thought of in your relationship and life with Meher Baba, through the fact that through that proximity that I had, that blessing of living with Meher Baba's Mandali. Through their eyes, through being with them, I was given a taste of what it was like to live with that household Meher Baba. So I just implore Baba, may he make it possible that this will help one of you, or some of you, or many of you, whatever he wishes, thy will be done. So now I know that many of you are wondering, okay, so how did she get to be with Eruch? How come she got to be with Eruch? Well, I can't answer that question, how come I got to be with Eruch, because there was nothing on my side. I had no special skills. I had no special diplomas. I had no special of anything at all that made it possible. I can only say that it was his compassionate grace that made it possible. But I can tell you how it came about. That I can share with you. And before I do, I just want to mention, I said before that I didn't meet Meher Baba in human form, but I've always thought of myself as sort of like someone who buys a ticket for the train, and then they get distracted by things in their life, and then they remember that they want to get on that train. So they rush to the train station, and the train has pulled out of the station. That's how I look at my life, because I heard about Baba before he had dropped his body, but it wasn't my destiny to be with him. So for me, for my heart, Baba answered my longing to want to be with him in a different way. And I'm sharing this because, you know, for all of us, I'm up here, yeah, this is my life, but I really believe to the depths of my being that anything that I'm sharing with you, yes, I was the vehicle. I can't deny that. I was the one things were told to, or I was there, or all that stuff. But I'm just a vehicle for it. Because anything that he told to me is for all of us. I just happen to be the vehicle so that it can be shared. So I had that longing, and I want to share a story with you as to why it sort of moved in the direction it did. And this is a story that takes place in the time of Prophet Muhammad. And it's about a young man who hears about Muhammad, and of course Prophet Muhammad, we call him that, but we all know as Baba lovers that he was the avatar of the age. So this young man, he's longing to get to Muhammad. He wants to be with him. He wants to serve him. He dreams of it. He thinks he'll do this for him. He'll try and find that for him. Anything. But life in the desert is such that if you're poor, you can't necessarily get to places as easily as you might. So time goes by and he just can't make it, and he just can't make it. And then one day, really? Already? Oh my God, okay, I can't believe it. One day, he has a dream, and the dream comes to him, and the dream is that Prophet Muhammad appears to him in his dream. He's been crying himself to sleep because the Prophet had passed away. He never got that chance to see him. But he says to this youngish man, who is now older, of course, because time's gone by, but he says, "Where were you when I called you? Where were you when I needed you?" To help his friends is to help me. So in my tiny heart of longing to have somehow wished I could have met Baba, served him, been with him. Of course, Eruch says I wouldn't have lasted a day. He once told me, you want to be with Meher Baba? Because I told him, I want a taste of that life, Eruch. Give me a taste of that life. Because, okay, I'll give you a taste of that life. You would have shit in your pants the first day with Meher Baba. Excuse me, I don't normally swear, but I'm trying to give you a picture of how difficult that life is. We glamorize it, we think these things. I still want it. But you see, his compassion was, Baba didn't answer my longing. It wasn't in my destiny to meet him. But in his way, he answered it immeasurably in another way. And that was giving me my life at Meherazad. So it so happened that I was in the right place at the right time. I wanted to do any and anything I could because I thought, well, if I can serve his Mandali, do anything to be of help to them, maybe in some indirect way I'll be serving Baba, helping Baba. So I was there. I used to hem up Mara's skirts, iron Baba's bed sheets, sew on snap buttons or press buttons. I forget what they're called now. Here, what are they called? Here, snaps. We call them snaps here. They call them press buttons. I would sew them up. I would be on the women's side. I would dust. I would clean, whatever. I'd run on an errands. In the morning, I would help go here. I would help, do dressings and do injections in the clinic. Any and everything I was willing to do. I would be willing to do anything. So I was there. And in the very beginning of the 80s, Eruch had to have cataract surgeries. I think the first one was in 80 and maybe the second one in 81. I'm not a very good date person, but I think that was it. And I was there. I was there in the morning at the clinic, but I was there all afternoon, just running errands, doing this, doing that. To this day, I don't know whether it was Dr. Gover's suggestion to Eruch or Eruch's suggestion to go here, or they both got together and said, yeah, she can be the gopher. So whatever it was decided that because Eruch had to recuperate from his cataract surgery, and in those days it was not like nowadays, you had to lie still, you had to rest. You weren't supposed to move your head. All these things were there. And for Eruch, that was almost impossible to just be idle and do nothing. So it was decided that I would be there, to help him like a gopher as anything he needed. But the main job was that I was to read to him because that would keep him lying down. And the stories, Eruch picked them out. There were always the stories of the saints and the masters because those had always been his bedtime stories from the time he grew up. So he loved them. And perhaps going back to how it was that whatever that destiny was that put me in that position, sometimes I think maybe it was my ignorance, my not knowing anything, because I had not been a seeker of Eastern philosophy. I hadn't read any of these books. I wasn't seeking anything till Meher Baba. And because I was reading to him these books, which he loved hearing these stories, and he had someone who was eager to learn, that it was all fresh and new, and I wanted to know everything about it, and I loved it. It was like a lifeline to me. And so I spent long, wonderful afternoons reading to Eruch. And in that circumstance, he opened up tremendous windows and doors to what it means to live for him. I remember one afternoon we're reading together, and Eruch, just out of the blue, he's lying there. Now this is his recuperation, so he's just lying there. And he stops me in the middle of reading, and he says to me, "Don't just read those words. Do you understand what you're reading? I want you to not just read them, I want you to imbibe them. I want you to inculcate them. I want you to learn it. I want you to know it. Remember this, Davana, remember this. Nothing and no one is your own but him." And that has stayed with me from my very first beginning of our relationship. So we would read these things, and then we would read Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa of Calcutta, and sometimes I'd be reading a passage to him, and he would say, "This is exactly the picture of how it was with Baba. You see how it is? You see how Ramakrishna, he's joking with the disciples. You see how somebody's come in with a big tokri, a basket of sweets to give to the lovers? This is exactly a picture of how it was with Meher Baba." So little by little by little, it was like he was feeding a baby, spoonful by spoonful by spoonful, but always with the focus on how to live for him, of what's required to live for him. And in that, of course, was a playfulness, because after that, of course, then he started getting a little antsy, so then he wanted me to help him with his correspondence, and then I started doing that. And then from there, as he got older, it moved on to more personal help. I would mend his clothes, I would help him with this, help him with that, until the very end. But through all that was this constant thread of always the focus being on Baba. And when circumstances would happen and I would forget that, he had said to me when I first started working with him, he said, "Can I have that liberty to tease you?" And I had always been teased all my life. I'm not good at teasing. When I tease, people always are offended, so I never like to tease back. But I get the end of the teasing, so I never really thought about it. So I just said, "Of course, Eruch." And Eruch teased me from the beginning to the end. But through those circumstances, and he always won and I always lost. But through those circumstances, I learned so much about the spiritual life, because Eruch would use those circumstances to help me learn. And he would say to me how living with Meher Baba is nothing but a life of humiliation and embarrassment. It's no fun, but ask any of us, and we would want to be with him again and again and again. Because once you have that taste of living with the God-man, it's an indescribable experience. It's just indescribable. It's like, becoming a man-eating tiger. Once they get the taste of blood, they want it again and again. That's how they felt. They just always wanted to come back and be with him. I never really, as Elisa said to me before I got up, she goes, "Oh, you're always writing notes and you never look at them." And she's right, because it ends up being that way. But there was something I didn't really share. Well, it doesn't matter. You got what you meant to be. But I'm going to share something. So there were lots of playful moments with Eruch that he would help me learn. And in working with him, I'll just share this one because it just gives you a picture of our life. So when when I was working with him doing correspondence, I never knew how to type. I had to learn how to type, which I did just because I wanted to work with him naturally. So I would learn at night. I'd try and figure out how to type, because the first time he dictated a letter to me when he was still recuperating, he hadn't realized, but I was writing the entire letter by hand and posted it, by hand. And when the next letter came and he saw that I was writing it, he goes, "You don't type?" And I remember him going, "My God, Baba, what sort of a person did you send to me?" So he was very good at teasing, but of course I did learn, how to do it and all. But there's not much time, and I know it's very hard to sit for long periods of time. So I'm just going to end with, is that everyone's ready, right, for it to be over?
You have so many notes. Go on.
Eruch used to tease. Elisa and I, we've known each other for many, many years. And he used to tease because when she and her husband, Robert Dreyfus at that time, would come to Meherazad, because we became friends and everything, she would come to the office, and I'd be sometimes at the office with Eruch, and Elisa would peek in, and Eruch would say, "Oh my God, the distractor has come." And then he'd say to me, "Okay, go out, say hello to your friend," But he embodied so much of all those qualities that are human qualities, but with tremendous humility. And I think it's because all of the Mandali were so scrubbed clean inside. And I've often thought that the reason we all love to get Eruch's hug, and I'm including myself in that, is because he was so clean of all of this, the garbage that goes through our mind here and goes through here. We're worried about that. We're thinking of this one. Why is that one like that? Da, 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 and our minds are going. But whatever he was doing it for Baba. So when someone came before him for an embrace, or when someone came into the hall to embrace him. And Eruch said this once to one individual who said to Eruch, like Keith is sitting there, he says, "Don't get up, Eruch, don't get up." And he starts to try and embrace Eruch sitting down. And Eruch just pushes him away with this strength, that you didn't think was there when he was older. Pushes him away and stands up and embraces him. And then he says to the young man, "You think I'm embracing you? I'm embracing the Baba within you. I'm embracing God within you." So I've always felt that part of the reason we wanted the hug was because he was so cleaned out. He became a channel for Baba to have all his love fill us up in that embrace, because that's true for all of us. When we lose ourselves in whatever we're doing, and Baba said this, when you lose yourself, God is immanent. So that means if you're a mom and taking care of your child and you just are enraptured with your baby and you forget everything, God is there. If you're a teacher and teaching your class and you're so involved in the process of wanting the students to learn that you're forgetting yourself in the subject matter, God is there. If you're a surgeon and you have some intricate operation and you're trying to get the vessels, sutured together or whatever it is, I'm not a medical person, but in that concentration, in that focus, you lose yourself because you're so focused. And that's what Baba wants from us, because when we lose ourselves, God is immanent. Baba said, libraries are filled with books on how to find God. But how can you find what is never lost? God is within you. But how can we reach what's within us? We have to be scrubbed and rubbed and cleaned and vacuumed and everything else till we lose ourselves, and then we find what we really are. Okay, I'm going to end this because I don't know why, but this is the 23rd anniversary. I can't believe this, but it is. And I wanted to share this because I thought, I'm 77 years old. None of us know. Baba says, you can walk out the door tomorrow. We don't know what is our destiny. And so that's why it's so important to remember him in every moment that we can. And that's why it's a sweet thing to think that when you lose yourself in doing these things, you are remembering him also in that way, because you're losing yourself. But I thought, who knows if I'll be here again. And Eruch had told me this, and I just want to make sure that I fulfill it. I'm not sure if I've ever said this before here at the center, and it struck me. So those of you who have known me through the years, I always used to wear something with a pocket, and I would carry these tiny little notebooks. They were like, if you took this size, really tiny, so they fit in a pocket. And the reason I did that was because if Eruch said to me in the morning, remind me I have to see Money at 3 o'clock and I have to tell her about such and such, I would scribble it in there. Eruch, remind him 3 o'clock meeting with Money. Or remind me Baoji needs that document, I need to bring it down to his office. I'd write it down. But in between those things, I would also write down anything that just struck me as being something I would want to remember. So let's say he was telling Mariah something, and it's to Mariah, but I say to myself, wow, that is really wonderful. I really want to remember this. I might write down what Eruch said in between all those reminders. And I mean, this was ongoing for years. I worked essentially full-time with Eruch for about 20 years or 2 decades. So I had lots of these little notebooks and things, but I never had time to really look at them other than to remind him of things. And then I'd put him, just put him in my cupboard and get a new one so that I'd be ready the next morning. But after Eruch passed away, of course, my life was radically changed. And one day I was cleaning out some things in my little room, and I noticed this little funky old suitcase that I kept dumping these little notebooks in. So I took it out, and for fun, fun isn't really the word, but memories of it, I just started reading some of my little notes. And in one of them, between some reminder, I had written down an incident that occurred one day. It wasn't in Eruch's last days, he was older, but not that old, where he wasn't real well, and by that point, he would take a rest. He was supposed to rest every day. And as I said before, rest was not something that Eruch liked to do. So he would call me in and ask me to read to him. And I love to read. Anyone who knows me knows that I love to read. And of course I write. But I read to him to the very end of his life, including the last night. So I'm reading in this, and I read it, and it just struck me so much. And when I was thinking, my God, what am I going to talk about tonight? And a lot of what I've said isn't what I had planned, but it must have been what he planned. But this had struck me because Eruch had asked me to share this. So this is why I'm going to do it, and that'll be it for the night. So I'm sitting on a little bench. If you've been in the Monash cabin, Eruch had a little brown bench inside the doorway, and his bed is right across. And it's just a plain little iron bed. And he was lying down for his nap, and he would always choose what we read. and I was reading to him from a small little booklet which was called In the Company of the God-Man. It was a Pune, India publication. I'm sure it may be reprinted somewhere, I don't know. I still have the original booklet, but I don't know if it's available or not. And the excerpt that I was reading would be too long to tell you now. But as I'm reading to him, Eruch looked like he had fallen asleep. So when I got to the end, I didn't want to disturb him, and I was afraid everything would kind of be creaky and he'd wake up or, be disturbed if I tried to leave. So I just put the little booklet down and I just sat quietly. But actually, he wasn't asleep, because the next moment, as soon as I finished it, Eruch rolled back over. He threw out his arm towards me. He says, "Give me the booklet." So I gave him the booklet. And in the Milliner Nash cabin, in Eruch's life with Baba, everything was at arm's length that he could possibly need in his life with Baba. So that even if, there was an emergency, he knew where everything was. Eruch's saying was a place for everything and everything in its place. And if you worked with him, as Andy knows, he was a stickler for that. So I'm sitting there, and Eruch marks 6 pages in the book of what we had read. And then he said this I am going to read because I want to make sure that I get it right. And I'm just really going to tell you the gist of the booklet, because naturally I couldn't give you all 6 pages. But the gist of it is this, that Eruch said to me, what I wrote down is, "This is what I want you to read and tell others when the time comes." So mind you, this is before he died, and long before he died. "Without living Baba's message of love and truth, how can one preach it and tell others how they should live theirs?" So I'm up here struggling with my own life, trying to live as Baba would wish. Please don't think I'm trying to tell you how to live yours. But I wanted to share that with you because I felt, in a sense, I may not be around to share it, and he did ask me to tell others about it. So that's the gist of that. But then he went on, he said, "And this is what I want from you when the time comes." And this goes back to what I said earlier about, yes, I was blessed to be that vehicle to receive that. But what Eruch told me, he's telling all of us. It's for all of us. "And this is what I want from you when the time comes. Though you may feel sad about this or that happening in your life, you must be surrendered to him. Whatever he wants, not what you want, be his. If this is what you want, Baba, all right, Baba, I am yours. Thy will be done." Jai Baba, everyone.